All right, hello and welcome to today's Mind Your Career webinar program. My name is Hannah Zwick and I work with the Alumni Career Development Team here at the University of Chicago in Hyde Park. I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar entitled Developing Your Leadership Skills as a New Professional. Today, we'll hear from Certified Professional Career Coach and Career Transitions Coach Amy Gardner. Amy works with individuals to help them advance their careers or transition into a new one. Previously, she was the Dean of Students for the UChicago Law School, and she's also served as the president of the UChicago Alumni Club of Chicago and as a member of the university's Alumni Board of Governors. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to turn the floor over to Amy.
Thank you. When you think of professionals and leaders, the images that probably come to mind for you are ones like these: older professionals, people who are used to being at the front of the room. The reality, though, is that they wouldn't have gotten to where they did later in their careers if they hadn't spent the time and energy to invest in developing their leadership careers when they were new professionals. So that's our topic today: leadership skills that can help new professionals advance in their careers. So we're going to be talking about people who might not be at the front of the room very often yet, but will be. So if you are a new professional or you supervise them, you're in the right place. So why am I in particular talking about this topic? As Hannah said, after graduating from the law school, I went on to become, I was an attorney first at a big firm and then an attorney and partner at a mid-sized firm. I then became the Dean of Students at the law school. From there, I then became a certified professional coach. So today I work with professionals at all stages of their careers. And often, no matter what the initial issue is that they come to me about, whether it's wanting to advance in their career or wanting to make a career transition, leadership skills come into play at some point as we're working together. So I often see leadership skill issues from the standpoint of professionals. I often see them also from the standpoint of employers, because we work with employers on trainings to address needs that they see with their workers. So things like how to solicit feedback, for example. So I see these issues every day from both standpoints. In addition, as a Dean of Students, I worked with students on developing their leadership skills. So I'm very passionate about this topic and glad to be with you today to talk about it. I also want to just note too that even though employers recognize that they need their professionals to have these leadership skills, there often aren't very good built-in systems to help you develop those. So as a new professional, it's terrific that you're on today and investing the time and energy yourself. So first, we want to just get the lay of the land and start with a quick poll question. Hannah, if you could put up question number 1.
All right, sure thing.
All right, so what drew you to today's webinar? Is it that you consider yourself a new professional? Is it that you supervise new professionals, or maybe both, or is it some other reason? All right, Hannah, can you share with us what the answers are?
All right, so it looks like about 43% of the audience has said that they consider themselves to be a new professional, and we're split 19% for the remaining 3 options.
Okay, so we will we'll talk about these issues both from the standpoint of new professionals and then also a little bit on if you supervise new professionals, how you can help them along. So I want to share a quote with you today that I encourage you to keep in mind today and after this session. Oh. There we go. Before you're a leader, success is all about growing yourself. When you become a leader, success is all about growing others. And that's a quote from Jack Welch. So I encourage you to keep that in mind, that this point in your career, when you're a new professional, it's a really great time to think about how you're going to grow your own skills. And then later on, you'll be able to share that with the people that you lead. So we have a second poll question. Do you work in an environment where development of your leadership skills is a priority for your supervisor? And Hannah's going to put that up. If you could just share your perception of whether that's a priority at your employer or not.
All right, and it looks like we have almost everybody in. Amy, we've had 27% say yes, 36% say somewhat, and the remaining 36% say no.
So not a strong endorsement of the how important your development is to your employer. So that's helpful to hear. Not encouraging necessarily, but helpful to hear. One of my mentors actually often says, no one will ever care more about your career than you do. And it seems like the experiences that you all are having right now in your current employment are backing that up, that it's important for you to prioritize your development because it's unlikely that anybody else really will. So leadership skills, what skills do you need to succeed? So this is a snippet of a much longer workshop that we do. And so I would just want to address a couple of things. First of all, the leadership skills that you need to succeed may vary slightly depending upon your industry and your ultimate career goals. But the reality is that the three skills we're going to focus on today are going to be helpful to you regardless of industry and regardless of your ultimate career objective. So my premise is that every new professional can enhance your career by focusing on and developing these three skills that we're going to talk about today. So these three skills we're focusing on are executive presence, which includes emotional intelligence and communication. The second skill we're going to focus on is self-awareness, which includes soliciting and responding to feedback. And we're going to get into specific strategies to help you do that. And then third is networking skills. For all of these, we're going to have exercises and specific tips that you can adapt or adopt after the webinar, as well as have you do some work during the session to grow in these three areas. So let's just do a quick assessment. On a scale of 1 to 5, how do you assess where you are right now in terms of your executive presence, the way that you're coming across, your self-awareness, and your networking skills? And this is just for you to know. We're not going to ask you to share this information with us. So on a scale of 1 to 5, just take a minute and jot down honestly how you assess your own skills in these three areas. All right, hopefully you've had a chance to do that. Let's do our third and final poll question. Hannah, could you put our third question up for us?
Sure thing.
Now this is, what skill are you most interested in improving? So you don't have to share what you think that you're lowest in as you assess yourself, but just what are you most interested in improving? And this will help us evaluate how much time we spend on each of these three areas today.
All right, it looks like we have 43% for executive presence, 19% for self-awareness, and 38% for networking.
Okay, great, that's really helpful, so thank you. Let me flip back, there we are. So you've probably logged into webinars before where you leave with this nagging sense that you need to do something, but you're not quite sure what. That is not what's going to happen today. As I mentioned, you're going to leave with specific things that you can do to start growing in these three areas, as well as we'll do some exercises during the session. So if you don't have one, please grab a piece of paper and a writing utensil, or you can open up a file on your computer to do some of these exercises, whatever you prefer. So we have a lot to do in an hour, so let's jump in. So first, executive presence. So what is executive presence? This is one definition, your ability to project mature self-confidence and a sense that you can take control of difficult, unpredictable situations, make decisions in a timely way, and hold your own with other talented and strong-willed people. So that's one definition that I think can be useful as you think about your own executive presence. This is another way of looking at executive presence. So about 300 senior executives were surveyed about how they evaluated executive presence and what they thought of when they were considering a more junior person's executive presence. As you can see from this chart, 67% of how they evaluated someone's executive presence came down to a broad category of characteristics that we'll call gravitas. 28% was about communication, and just 5% was about how the person appears. So I think when we think about executive presence, we often think about polish or suits, or being more dressed up than other people in the room, that sort of thing. But as we can see, that in reality, that's not at all what people are looking at when they evaluate your executive presence. So in considering gravitas, the factors that the senior executives were looking at included characteristics like confidence, decisiveness, integrity, emotional intelligence, reputation, vision, and charisma. And when they talked about communication, they were talking about specific skills like speaking skills, ability to command a room, assertiveness, ability to read a room, sense of humor, and body language. Now, one of the things that jumps out to me as I look at those characteristics, both the gravitas characteristics and communication, is that those are almost all entirely within your control and entirely within the realm of your power to improve in these specific areas. And even actually the appearance factor, that 5% that they mentioned, it counts largely as a filter through which you can convey your ideas. And so your communication and gravitas tie back into that appearance. So really 95% plus of the characteristics that feed into executive presence are things you have control to enhance or to work on. So executive presence, why does it matter specifically for new professionals? Well, part of why it matters, as with all of the leadership skills we're talking about today, is because if you don't work on it now as a new professional, by the time that you could be eligible for promotions or advancement in your career, it will be considered into whether or not you advance. In other words, by working on it today, you ensure that you are considered down the road. It's not something that you can just develop overnight, and it's not something that you can wait to develop. No one in the history of humanity, I don't think, has ever said, oh, gee, I wish I hadn't enhanced my leadership so early in my career. So executive presence is definitely one of those things that will help you advance down the road. And it's important to be able to advocate for yourself, for others, and for your ideas now at an early stage in your career. So we're going to do an exercise that is intended to help you enhance your executive presence right now. So there's two parts to this. So grab that piece of paper that I mentioned, and we'll have a timer. You'll see that timer on the screen. We're going to spend about 2 minutes, and what I'd like to ask you to do is to write down 3 strengths and then 3 ways that you bring value to your team or to your employer. And if you're not presently employed, then you can write about 3 ways that you do bring value or have brought value in the past to your workplace. So again, 3 strengths and 3 ways that you add value, and you have 2 minutes to do that, and then we'll come back. All right, about 45 seconds remaining to write down those 3 strengths and 3 ways that you add value. All right, so hopefully you were able in that 2 minutes to jot down 3 strengths and 3 ways that you add value. So next we're going to take those strengths and values and make them into a statement about the personal impact that you add and that you bring. So what we're going to do is combine what you've come up with. So let me give you an example. So first you're going to write out a sentence about who you are, what you are. So if your strengths, for example, were you're a teacher and your strengths were your compassion, your passion for education, and your commitment, then you might say for your I am statement, I am a compassionate teacher, I'm passionate about the transformative power of education, and I'm committed to making a difference. So that first sentence is going to be combining your strengths. The second sentence is where you're going to talk about the result, what happens because of those strengths. So there you're talking about the value that you bring. So again, with our example of a teacher, if the value you bring is being able to meet students where they are and able to teach a variety of subjects and able to encourage students through difficulties, then you would say, and as a result, I meet my students where they are, can teach them a variety of subjects and help them succeed far beyond what they thought possible. So again, the I am statement is where you're talking about your strengths, and the and as a result statement is talking about the value you bring. So 2 minutes to work on those, and I'll start our clock. Again, about 40 seconds remaining to finish writing out your personal impact statement. All right, that's 2 minutes. So that's a statement that you can continue honing and working on. And obviously, one 4-minute exercise is not going to completely turn around your executive presence overnight. But the idea is that by thinking about and writing down your strengths and the way that you're contributing, it helps build your confidence, it helps build your gravitas, and you can use those points when you're meeting with a supervisor, for example, to talk about promotion, or when you're going into a review. So I encourage you to go back to that personal impact statement you just created and continue honing it as you grow in your career and think about the value that you bring and about your strengths, and add new strengths as you learn and grow. So let's talk about other ways that you can enhance your executive presence. So first, I encourage you to think about what you can control. For example, you can control whether you get additional experience with public speaking. You can sign up for a class, whether through your employer or on your own, which as we talked about already, can be really necessary, especially early in your career, because to qualify for advanced leadership development programs that your employer may offer, you usually have to have gotten to a certain point on your own earlier. So I encourage you to think about the elements of executive presence and which ones you want to focus on developing, and then take control and focus on working on those. And as you do that, seek out opportunities. So if there's an opportunity for someone to volunteer within your office to take on a particular assignment that includes, for example, needing to run meetings, and that's something you want to work on, volunteer for it. You can also seek out volunteer opportunities outside your work that will help you to get more comfortable. For example, working with new people, or working with people who are different than you, working with giving more presentations, running meetings, things like that. So look for opportunities within your office and outside your office. Ask for specific suggestions to improve. We're going to talk about how to ask for feedback a little bit later, but asking your peers, how do you think I did in that meeting? Or asking a supervisor, how did you feel about my performance in that situation? Or asking a mentor if they can watch you in different situations or offer feedback for you based on lunch with them or networking coffee with them, things like that. Ask people for specific suggestions. The first time you ask, they may be taken off guard and may not give particularly helpful feedback, but letting them know you want it really opens the door so that they can give you helpful feedback in the future. But you have to ask, because usually people aren't going to give it to you otherwise. And then focus on body language. A great way to do that, if you're not super comfortable with your body language or don't know where to start, is Amy Cuddy's TED Talk. It's one of the most famous, most viewed TED Talks. And the basic premise is that by focusing on power posing that you do before interactions and before talks, meetings, things like that, you can really enhance your performance. So check out Amy Cuddy's TED Talk as a great place to start on body language. And next, another step you can take to develop your executive presence is to develop your self-awareness. So we're going to move into talking about self-awareness, the second leadership skill that we're focusing on today. So why does self-awareness matter for your success as a new professional? It matters because if you don't focus on developing your self-awareness, you're not going to know the other areas that you need to improve. So that's why it really matters at this particular stage in your career. I also do want to note too that in addition to developing your self-awareness so you know where you can improve, by developing your self-awareness, then you get a better understanding of those strengths that we just talked about in your executive presence, and then can learn to capitalize on those strengths. So if you learn that you're really good at building consensus, you can then develop that strength further and then use that as you advance in your career. So self-awareness is important for your success, both to learn where you need to improve and also what your strengths are so that you can go off, benefit from those even more. So as we talk about self-awareness, we're going to focus on feedback because getting feedback from others is a good way to develop your own self-awareness. So let's talk about some specific ways that you can do that. So often I hear from new professionals that they don't know how to get more feedback and that they just get sort of a blanket, oh, good job, you're doing fine. And that may feel great in the moment, but the reality is it's not going to help you advance or develop in your career. So for those of you who supervise new professionals who are with us today, I encourage you to think about feedback not just as a necessary evil, but as a way to really guide and enhance the careers of your new professionals. So let's talk about some specifics, how, when, and where to ask for feedback. First, you want to ask for it close in time or proximity to the event or work that you're asking for feedback on. So in other words, you don't want to ask 6 months later about how a project was received. You want to ask within a day or two of turning in a project or the particular meeting that you're asking about, things like that. You also want to ask for it privately. Just as you probably don't want to get feedback publicly, it's not fair to put your supervisor on the spot in a public situation asking for feedback. So be sure to ask for feedback to be delivered privately. You also want to ask for feedback in a situation where the person giving the feedback has a chance to prepare for more substantial feedback. So, for example, when I was a practicing attorney, I would often ask the partner that I worked for feedback in the elevator as we were leaving the courtroom, when it was just the two of us. And that meant that I got knee-jerk reactions to how I had done in court, but it also meant that the partner didn't really have time to process and think about things that I could have done differently. So while I got feedback, it wasn't necessarily as helpful as it could have been. So think about making sure the person has time to process what just happened or review your work product fully. And another way to do that is to just say, hey, I'd love some feedback on the ABC project. Could I talk to you about it tomorrow, and schedule a time so that they have time to prepare. And finally, you want to ask for feedback often. As I mentioned before, we often get feedback that just says, oh yeah, good job. And that feels great in the moment, but it's not helping us to learn and grow and improve. So by asking for feedback more often, you have the chance to change your performance in plenty of time before, say, your annual review. I often remind my clients that if you don't ask for feedback, it doesn't mean the person isn't thinking it. It just means you don't know what they're thinking, and so you can't improve on it. So be sure to ask for feedback often, close in time and proximity to the event or work, privately, and when the person giving the feedback has had time to think about it and reflect. So let's talk about specifics to how to ask for feedback, because this often, I think, trips up new professionals. So there's 5 strategies that I want to share with you about how to give yourself, or how to ask for and get the feedback that's going to actually be helpful. So one way is to give yourself negative feedback first. Now, what I mean by that is you could say something like, I know that I tend to speak quickly and sometimes don't sense when others would like to speak. I'd like to get better at that. Do you have any thoughts on how I could improve? And then after the supervisor answers, then you say, and what else could I be working to improve right now? So what you're doing is letting them know that you're thinking these things through, that you don't consider yourself to be infallible and perfect in every way. And you're inviting them to comment on a specific thing that you have noticed, and then also asking them for a second item. And that can just open the doors of communication better than if you just show up and say, what could I work on improving? So that's strategy 1, giving yourself negative feedback first. Strategy 2 is make the feedback part of an overall commitment to professional development. Now, the reason this strategy is helpful is because it puts out there, hey, I'm working on this. I take my career seriously and I want to improve and I want your help to do that. So what you would say is something like, I've made a commitment to improve on 3 specific areas over the next quarter or the next year, and I would appreciate any thoughts you have on what those areas should be. Then when you've heard your supervisor's feedback, you follow up with something like, I'd be grateful if you could help me keep the commitment I've made to improve in that area. So here what you're doing is saying, I'm not just looking for one item that I'm going to improve on. I view this, I take my career seriously and I want to improve on several areas. And then you're asking the supervisor to be your partner in helping you learn and grow and stay accountable. So that can be, that strategy can be helpful for a number of reasons. So those are the first 2 strategies. Then for strategy 3, you would say, reframe negative feedback to focus on the learning opportunity. So often supervisors are reluctant to offer negative feedback directly. One of the trainings that our company offers is we go into employers and teach supervisors to give feedback, and we have another session we do with more junior employees about how to ask for feedback. We hear all the time from supervisors, they don't want to give negative feedback because they're afraid that the newer professional is going to react negatively. They're either going to be angry or they're going to get emotional. So this strategy is really helpful because it reframes. So you say, if you have a situation like that where your supervisor doesn't want to give you negative feedback, you say, what is something you think I could learn from this project? Or you say, what is something you think I could learn from you? And in that way, you're letting them know that you look up to them, that you view them as a role model. And again, you're really inviting them to partner with you in your career development. Another strategy that gets to this issue of supervisors being afraid to offer negative feedback is strategy 4, minimize the impact of negative feedback proactively So the supervisor knows you're not going to overreact. So for this strategy, you'd say something like, if I could change just one small thing about how I handle this type of project or this type of assignment, what should it be? So the reason that this strategy is helpful is because you've let them know you're not going to overreact. You're going to view it as a small thing, even if the feedback they give you is significant. So that's why that strategy can be really useful. And the fifth strategy is to dig into compliments. So this gets back to this problem that new professionals often face where supervisors say, oh yeah, it's fine. Or, oh yeah, you did a good job. When someone says, yeah, you did a good job on that project, ask for details. So say something like, thank you. Can I ask if there's something specific that stood out in the things that I did on this project? And then part two of this is really important. You then say, what should I do differently next time? Now, the reason that phrasing is so important is often what we say is, is there anything I could do differently next time? Well, of course there is. But you're inviting, when you say what, or could I do anything differently next time? You're inviting the supervisor to say, no, you did fine. So the language, what should I do differently next time, is important because it operates from a place of course you can improve. Everyone can improve. And given that everyone can improve and you know that about yourself, what should you do? And so that phrasing can get much better results. So we've talked about 5 specific strategies to get feedback, and then you can use that feedback to develop your self-awareness, which is such an important part of your leadership development. In addition to the strategies we've talked about for getting feedback, there's some other things you can do to improve your self-awareness. So one is to have yourself videoed with and without sound. And the without sound piece is really important. Often we think we are coming across and appearing differently in meetings and interactions, not just in speeches and more formal things, than we are. So by having someone video you and then watching it with and without sound, you'll get some really valuable information to improve your self-awareness. Another thing, and I know this sounds crazy, is to ask one of your colleagues to take a photo of you during a meeting. And here's why this is important. Having someone take a photo of you that is not posed, just the way that you are sitting during a meeting, can be really valuable to see what your body language looks like and what messages you're giving off. So for example, often new professionals who don't feel particularly confident or comfortable will put their materials down in front of them and not be willing to take up their fair amount of space at the table. Or you may be taking notes on an iPad, but it may look like you're surfing the internet. Another thing that people often do when they feel comfortable is they'll slouch. And so seeing a picture of how you look during a meeting can help you see if you're doing any of those things. And so the way to do that is just ask a colleague, tell a colleague, hey, I watched this webinar trying to improve my leadership or trying to improve my career, and they recommended this weird thing of having someone take a picture of you during a meeting. Would you do that for me at some point during today's meeting? And I'll happily do it for you next week. So just blame it on me. Another way that you can build your self-awareness is to set an intention before an interaction and then review that intention afterwards. So just in your calendar, look at your meetings and your interactions you're going to have for the next couple days and think about how you want to come across in those. So if you're going to have a meeting where people are going to be debating a topic, maybe your intention is that you want to come across as curious and interested without getting frustrated. So you would write that down, and then after the meeting, come back and look at it and think about whether you were able to do that. So just being intentional about how you're showing up, which comes back to executive presence, can be really helpful in thinking about whether you've been successful and in building your self-awareness. Another way to build that self-awareness is to just check in with yourself. Are you staying true to that personal impact statement we just worked on? Are you allowing your strengths to shine? Are you adding the value that you want to be adding? And finally, learning to ask and respond to feedback which we just worked on. So let's move on to our third and final skill for new professionals to develop your leadership, and that's networking. Now, I know that networking often gets a bad rap, so I encourage you to think about it as relationship building. So why are networking skills important for new professionals in particular? Well, we often think of the obvious ways that networking is helpful. It might be helpful for us in terms of sending us business down the road if you're a lawyer, accountant, or in some other position where you need to bring in clients. And that's true. We also think of networking as being helpful when you want to change jobs. And that is definitely true. As a coach who works with people often wanting to do career transitions, I can tell you your network is very important when it comes time to switch jobs. But beyond those obvious ones, your network can be really important, particularly as a new professional, because it helps you just to feel less alone in the workplace, and staying in touch with people, for example, from your college class who are at a similar stage in their career can just be really can really enhance your profession, just to know that other people are dealing with the same thing and that you have someone else that you can call on when you run into a jam. So networking skills really matter for your success as a new professional. And I also just want to add one note that I often work with clients who have been working for 30 years who tell me they don't have a network. And it's much harder to develop your network later on than it is now. So no one has ever regretted time that they spent building their network. So you'll reap the benefits of your network for much longer if you put in the time now rather than waiting till down the road. And I also want to note that as we talk about networking, I encourage you to set aside the vision of the person who comes back with from a reception or a networking event with a stack of business cards. That is not what we're talking about. We're talking about actually building a network of people that you stay in touch with and can call on, and who can call on you. So if you're thinking, I already know this, why are we spending time on networking? I encourage you to ponder this quote. Just because a person knows that a network is important to her success, it doesn't mean she's devoting sufficient time and energy to making it useful and strong. And that is definitely the case that I see often. So we're going to do 2 networking exercises before we wrap up here. So for the first one, we're going to expand your digital network through LinkedIn. So hopefully you all have a LinkedIn profile. And hopefully you maybe even have taken advantage of the U of C's LinkedIn profile review session that they did for young alumni recently that I got to participate in. But what we're going to do with this 3 minutes is you're going to expand your network on LinkedIn by reaching out to 3 people who are not part of your network, and you're going to send them a personalized invitation to connect. And that personalized piece is really important. It is easy to just send a generic invitation, but it's much better if you take the moment to customize the invitation and say, it was great to meet you at this event last month, would love to stay in touch, or I just realized we aren't connected on LinkedIn and would love to be. You can refer back to how you know them if you want, but whatever it is, just send 3 personal invitations. And if you can't think of anyone to connect to, you can always connect to me. So take 3 minutes and add to your LinkedIn network. And I'll start the clock. All right, so just 15 seconds left to send those final LinkedIn invitations. All right, so hopefully that was helpful for you to spend a little bit of time. And hopefully you've seen that how in just a couple of minutes you can really expand your network on LinkedIn. And I encourage you to think of LinkedIn not just as a way to keep track of people throughout their career moves, which is really helpful, but also as a way to share news with people. So you can share an article, maybe set a goal to once a week, share an article about your industry on LinkedIn, and to also once a week engage on other people's posts. By doing that, you help raise your profile, you can help encourage your connections, and it, again, help you just feel more connected to your industry as you grow throughout your career. I want to particularly thank Ray and Scott for reaching out to me. You both sent great LinkedIn personalized invitations, so thank you for that. Next, and our final exercise, we're going to work on deepening connections. So LinkedIn is great, and electronic connections are great. But to deepen your connections, being face-to-face really helps. So we're going to go a little bit less than 3 minutes, but with this next block, I want you to reach out to somebody who you want to get together with for coffee sometime in the next 2 weeks. So send them an email, invite them to coffee, give them 2 or 3 blocks when you might be available in the next 2 weeks to get together for coffee. And if you're in a more rural area and the people you want to get together with are not in your same town, invite them to do coffee over FaceTime with you. So take about 2 minutes and send an invitation to someone you'd like to get to know better, inviting them to coffee as you work on deepening your connections with your network. All right, we're going to take about 20 more seconds to send that email inviting someone to get coffee with you over the next 2 weeks. All right, hopefully that was enough time for you to reach out to someone in your network and invite them to get coffee. Let's talk about a few ways that you can increase your networking skills, additional steps that you can take. So first, you can watch the UChicago Alumni webinar, Going Beyond Networking Coffees, 3.5 Tips to Turbocharge Your Networking Skills, because that webinar may be helpful to you as well. You can check out the resources on the apochromatic.com blog, including there's a download on how to find mentors. There are also a lot of blog posts on networking, including one on how to use LinkedIn to serve your network by sharing their content, commenting on their content, and things like that. Another way that you can build your networking skills is just to observe. I feel like every time I go to Starbucks in Chicago, I learn something new about networking because of all the networking coffees taking place around me. So watch what your colleagues are doing to build their network and ask. You might even ask your supervisor, how they serve their network, or how their network has been useful to them, how they have gone about their networking and developing their own network. And then just do it. So start with a classmate, someone that you know well, and take them to coffee as a practice run. Don't start with the CEO of your employer. You're the only way really to get better at networking is just to do it. So I encourage you to just give it a shot. So we've talked about 3 leadership skills that are important for new professionals: executive presence, which includes emotional intelligence and communication; self-awareness, including soliciting and responding to feedback; and networking skills. One more thing I want to add too is when you do that first networking coffee, if you're not sure what to talk about, go back to that personal impact statement you just prepared and talk about how the other person's career is going, how they're doing, what challenges they're facing, but review that personal impact statement so you can talk about what value you're adding to your employer. And one more thing before we get to Q&A, there are several books that we've put together in a leadership skills book bundle that we're happy to give a couple of those bundles away to people on today's webinar. So if you want to register for that, just go to applesignup.com/maroon2 and you can sign up to win one of those book bundles that we'll have sent to your house. And you do need to sign up by the 31st if you want to win one of those bundles of books. So I started off by telling you that as a new professional, you can improve your leadership skills by focusing on 3 areas. We talked about executive presence, self-awareness, and networking. As I hope you've seen during our short time together today, improving your leadership skills as a new professional doesn't have to be arduous. It doesn't have to be super time consuming. With just 3 minutes here, 4 minutes there, you really can work on improving these leadership skills that are going to be important to you down the road. So thank you for taking the time and making the investment in your career to join me today and focusing on those 3 skills to advance in your career. And with that, I'm happy to open it up for any questions. And if you do need to jump off, you can always feel free to email me, amy@apochromatic.com. And again, there's that link to sign up to win one of the book bundles. Hannah?
All right, thank you, Amy. So everyone in the audience, if you have questions and you have not submitted those yet, now is the time. So the first one we have is how much of executive presence is you've done it or you either have it or you don't. I fear there is no way to change my attributes.
So there absolutely is a way to improve your executive presence. Hopefully you can start by implementing some of the tactics that I've suggested, but I see this all the time with clients because one of the things that we do with clients that we're working with in particular on their executive presence is we start by videotaping them, and that way we videotape them a little bit at every session so they can see a baseline. And I know from that experience, and I'm not saying that you need to work with a coach to improve your executive presence, but what I'm saying is I know from that experience how much you can improve your executive presence in a short time just by making it a priority and seeking out the opportunities to improve your communication skills, to lead meetings, to really concentrate on what your intention is going into an interaction. And if you check out our blog at apochromatic.com, click on blog and search executive presence, we have some other videos and blog posts there that would be helpful to you too.
Great. Next up is how do you bridge the gap of what others see in you and the skills you actually have? In particular, how do you fight against gender and racial stereotypes other than just persevere?
So first, I think acknowledging that those stereotypes are out there. It's not all in your head, which I think it can be really hard, especially if you feel alone in that. So one of the things that I think can be really helpful is to talk to mentors, particularly mentors who've experienced what you're experiencing and who may have had similar situations, and just learning how they've gotten through those situations and turned it around. That's also where I think that talking to fellow young professionals. So I would encourage you to look for networking groups that are based on the characteristics that you feel you're being discriminated against as a result of. So for example, in Illinois and Chicago, the Women's Bar Association is great for female lawyers to talk about these issues and other issues as well. So I encourage you to seek out professional groups, seek out mentors to remind yourself and acknowledge that this is a fact. It's not in your head, and to consider how you can start to toot your own horn. Maybe enlist a colleague to speak up on your behalf. So I read an anecdote about the Obama White House that women adopted a strategy of trumpeting and echoing each other's ideas in meetings as one way to overcome some of what they saw. So I encourage you to think about those strategies. And finally, at some point, you think about what other environment you might prefer to work in, because it's not a job that you take does not have to be a life sentence. So work on these skills so that you can grow and advance and potentially move to another environment if that's ultimately your decision.
Great. And then next up is, how far along in your career do you have to be to work with a coach?
So I have clients who are maybe 6 months into their first job after college or graduate school, all the way up to people who are in their 60s. So I think the right time to work with a coach is when there's, you need to change something in your career, whether that's developing your own skills or making a career change. And then just being ready to invest in yourself. And there are oftentimes employers will be willing to hire a coach or to fund a coach, or they may have coaching programs. So I think it's never too early to think about how you learn best and how you'll grow best. And for some people, that might be having one-on-one accountability and someone helping them to develop. And for other people, it might be starting with a book, going to a particular workshop, things like that. But it's never too early to really take ownership of your career and start focusing on how you can grow and improve. And a coach can be a great way to do that.
Great. And then the next one is, how do you find a coach?
So I would encourage you to start looking for certified professional coaches. There are lots of people who declare themselves to be a coach who haven't necessarily gone through the training and certification process. There's an organization called the International Coach Federation. ICF has a website where you can search certified coaches. Often people want a coach in their area, but because coaching is often over the phone or video, it may not matter. I mean, even for my clients in Chicago, where I'm based, I don't necessarily meet with them in person every time. So you can also ask for recommendations and think about if there's a specific skill you want to work on. So for example, we have clients who come to us just for executive presence because we have a particular executive presence program. And then we have other clients who might just say, I want to advance, but I don't know how to get there. So think about if there's a specific thing you want to work on, then you want to look for a coach who is well equipped to help you with that. And beyond that, it's just important that you have a good rapport, that you trust the coach, that you feel like they have your best interest at heart and are going to work really hard for you. I think that is probably the most important. And I'm always happy too. You can always email me and I can connect you to someone if there's something specific you're looking for, because I have a big network of other coaches too. So it's amy@apochromatic.com.
Perfect. And I think we have time for maybe one or two, depending on length.
Right,
so the next one, okay, sorry, no pressure. As I was saying that we had one more come in. So the next one up is, I'm currently looking for a new job. I have many connections in a large network, but I feel like I'm always having meetings, but nothing seems to ever come from them. I actually had one right before this webinar. What can I do to bridge the gap and get something tangible from networking meetings and calls?
That's a great question. So the point of networking is not really just to drink a lot of Starbucks. The goal is really to help people in your network and then hopefully encourage them to help you. So one thing I would think about is how you're structuring that coffee. Are you taking ownership and saying, I'm going to go in and talk about this goal and hope for this outcome and have this ask at the end, or are you just going and having coffee? And just having coffee is a perfectly reasonable thing to do with people in your network. But when you have a specific goal of getting a new job, you need to take control of the conversation and decide what you're going to ask for. Go in with an intention. So maybe your ask is, I know a job was posted at your employer and I think I'm a good fit for it. Could you introduce me to the right person? Or could you put me in a good word for me? Or maybe it's just, I want you to keep me in mind if you hear of anything. And then you need to be following up with people, because even if the conversation doesn't get to the nitty-gritty, you can do that through the follow-up emails if you have to. So when you schedule a coffee, put it in your calendar for a week or two later to follow up with them to make sure you're getting the outcomes that you want.
Great. And then last one is, how do you appropriately ask for feedback or mentorship from someone who is not your supervisor when you have a lot of office politics to consider?
So that's definitely tricky. I would start by asking for feedback from them and just say, you know, I know you're not my direct supervisor, but I'm really trying to learn and grow in my career, and I'm hoping you might be able to offer me some feedback. And you can use one of those 5 strategies we talked about. When you've gotten the feedback from them, then you can evaluate whether they'd be a good person to be a mentor or not. If they're not willing to invest in your career and be honest with you, that's probably not a great mentor anyway. But I think then you can just acknowledge the elephant in the room and say, you don't need to ask them formally to be your mentor, but you can just start going to them and asking them for feedback. And you need to evaluate what you say to your supervisor about that. You might want to comment to your supervisor in advance that you know that your supervisor is so busy supervising and mentoring all of you that you hope that they don't feel awkward about it, but you're thinking of asking, you know, Fred down the hall for some feedback, but let it develop organically. So just start by having more conversations with Fred about your career development, things like that, and let it grow into a mentoring relationship. Don't just march down the hall and ask Fred to be your mentor, because that could really backfire.
Great, perfect. Well, we are just about at time. My clock just turned to 1 o'clock exactly. So thank you to everyone for participating today, and a special thank you to Amy for sharing her expertise on building leadership skills, but also developing your presence as a leader. We'll be back next week on Wednesday, July 31st, with tips on applying to medical school. And, you know, everybody, please visit our events page at careers.uchicagoalumni.org for our most up-to-date schedule of events. And everybody, take care, have a great rest of your day, and look out for a follow-up email from us, because we'll include some of Amy's information on Apochromatic as well.
All right, and be sure to sign up for the book bundle too to win that.